Hi, and welcome to Chopping Wealth. I'm Brian Portnoy, CEO and founder of Shaping Wealth. And Chopping Wealth is a monthly feature of the newly rebranded Compass platform, formerly the Outsourced Chief Behavioral Officer, OCBO. And the topic today, with two good friends who I couldn't be more excited to chat with, is the place where we often don't want to go, sort of the Lord Voldemort of topics, politics. There, I said it out loud. American politics in particular have become quite contentious, and it really is not something that we're entirely comfortable talking about. But we know, and my guests today are going to, give us some detail. We know that investors slash citizens think about the relationship between politics and markets, and we know that financial advisors are thinking about this all the time in terms of how to provide great long-term advice to clients through the noise of upcoming elections. So I'll allow them to kind of introduce themselves in any detail, but Mike Antonelli from Baird, Chief Market Strategist, Peter Lazaroff from Plancorp, Chief Investment Officer. Hi, guys. How you doing?
Great.
Thrilled to be here. Thanks for asking us to join.
Yeah, happy to have you here. Mike, I want to start with you because, you're on the road every week, just about every week, or on a Zoom with clients. I mean, Baird is a massive platform with more than 1,000 advisors, right? And so you're representing tens of thousands of families. And I know this politics topic, which I think you always start off by saying it's quite sensitive, is something that comes up all of the time. Maybe I have a bunch of things I want to get into, but maybe start us off by sharing what your walkabout has been in the context of this crazy upcoming presidential election.
Yeah, so I spend a lot of time, on the road. And that gives me a lot of insight into what people are asking, what's on their mind, what really, really matters to them in their lives. And around election years, I mean, certainly presidential election years more than the off years, but around presidential election years, it's my entire career for the better part of like 5 months. And I was on the road last week. I'll be on the road this week and next week with real people, real customers, real clients of Baird's with concerns about money and politics and what the intersection of that looks like. And to me, I find it incredibly fascinating because I'm a disciple of yours, Brian, and behavioral finance in general. So I'm always curious to hear what's on people's minds and why. So I'll end up in conversations where people will try to bring in things that they're hearing, right, either from their friends or on the news, and ask me, how does it impact my investments or the stock market? I'll give you an example. So instead of asking, how will the Fed, impact the stock market, they'll be like, how does the southern border impact the stock market? Why is that the case? Well, it's because they watch a lot of news, they consume a lot of media, they consume a lot of social media. That tends to be the topics that are front of their mind, and they're trying to say to themselves, is there some relation between the two? And I spend, and Peter probably spends, a huge, huge chunk of my career trying to disentangle those things and saying, here are the things the stock market cares about, the stock market. And most of those don't have anything to do with what you are getting fed from the media or social media in general. So disentangling those things takes an enormous amount of effort. And I enjoy doing it because I'm a student of behavior and the student of interacting with average normal people. I think I'm pretty good at it. I got some tips if we want to go over those a little bit later. But I think that all of this is behavior and media related. None of this is financially or Excel or asset allocation related. These are all conversations that come from the notion of, I'm hearing things, it must impact my money, right? It has to. And then when I say no, I say no in a pretty unique way, and hopefully we can dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I have like 5 follow-ups already with you, but I want to give Peter the mic. So you are the Chief Investment Officer for very well-regarded multi-billion-dollar platform, thousands of families that you and your colleagues take care of. I'm sure you as well, Peter, are sort of almost compelled to address the politics that are going on. So, like Mike, starting at a high level, what are the messages that you're sending, and what are the questions and concerns that you're receiving?
So I think even though Michael and I have not spoken about this topic in advance, I anticipate us overlapping and agreeing like at least 95% of the way, if not all the way to 100%.
I'm gonna have to intervene at some point, then get an argument going. But go
Yeah,
ahead. It is
we can
politics. Come
try our
on.
best. And the thing is that politics just, it's so emotionally charged, and the media makes it that way so that you tune in. And I think the big thing when I have conversations with clients, much like Michael's doing, with people either via Zoom or in person, the key is to slow it all down. And politics and portfolios do not mix. And I think a lot of advisors, even watching this, not only know that, but have been convinced. There are charts all over the internet. There are PowerPoints. There are sessions like this that just show really strong evidence that who is the president, as well as who has dominance in Congress. There's no like statistically significant piece to that we could use it to predict where things are going to go. There are amazing narratives. There are amazing anecdotes. But I don't know that that's what we're going to have to convince people. I'm really excited to hear the thing that shuts down the conversation when Michael has it. But for me, at least, just to kind of kick it off, usually when I'm speaking with clients, I'll just step back and sort of make fun of myself for my lack of interest in politics, which is true. I never really try to convey a party preference. And in reality, that is also true. I don't know that I necessarily have one. And just say, I don't even really like politics. I don't watch the inner workings of politics the way that I'll watch NFL games, where I watch pre-show and post-show and they're dissecting every movement. I just don't do any of that. What I care is about helping you make good choices with your money. And I think when you get into what the drivers of stock market returns are, you start to see that it is a bigger picture. And so, when I think of how do those conversations go, again, it's slowing it down because there's usually a lot of emotion involved. It's not necessarily making people feel bad if they're fearful of the world that is around them. But what we as advisors have to do, whether we are on the front lines or we're more in a consulting role like Michael or myself, is that there are going to be roughly half of our clients who are fearful of the outcome that happens from the election. And so how can we help that half calm down, and how can we help the other half, in the process of the election, not make poor choices along the way?
Yeah, so my one fear coming into this conversation was that maybe we would wrap up in all of 3 minutes, because I could show a chart that I'm guessing each of you has within arm's reach that shows the relationship between political outcomes and market outcomes. And, is it R or R squared? I can't, remember. But the point is that the correlation between the two is effectively zero. There's maybe slight differences in what political party is in power and the market outcome. But really, over a multi-decade sweep, it's a push. Right. So the three of us could almost in unison put up the exact same chart. And there's like 900 versions of this chart that shows that, the election is not going to have, I was going to say, a material outcome,
A predictable outcome. We can't really predict it, maybe is the easiest way.
Can't really predict it, but maybe we'll get into some nuances on sector activity and things like that. And so, shock of shocks, we end up with the behavioral story. And so, Mike, to you, why is it that facts don't matter?
That's a great question. And I actually have an answer for this. And I think about this a lot. I heard this from my friend, I think it was Morgan Housel, said, human beings aren't seeking the truth. Okay, they're not looking for the truth. They're looking for the removal of uncertainty. And that leads them to believe a whole bunch of things that have no basis in reality. And I think about that a lot. Right? If you think that something happened in the world, you're not seeking what actually happened. You're seeking the answer that just removes your uncertainty about the event. That's what people in general tend to do. So I try to tell them through storytelling. I've almost molded my career from being a University of Chicago finance MBA into a storyteller. And you've taught me that. And a bunch of people that I interact with online have taught me that, because I get the best reactions from clients by being a good storyteller. That's how I really have a big impact. I'll just give you a quick example. So I start off every single politics event with clients, real people who have real money, who have real concerns, by saying that election years are where the big mistake happens, quote unquote, the big mistake. What's the big mistake? Let me tell you a story, right? And my story will be, in 2016, I remember sitting with a group of individuals when it was clear that President Trump was going to win Trump was going to win over Clinton. And it was a bunch of professional money managers, and the stock market fell 5% that night, the most it can fall overnight, the most. And I did a snap poll of a bunch of money managers. Who's going to buy stocks tomorrow morning? It looks like Trump will be our next president. And none of them raised their hands. Like, none of them. They made what? The big mistake, thinking that politics and money have an intersection. I'm going to teach you, dear client, how to avoid the big mistake. So I plant the seed in their head that there's a mistake about to be made, and then I try to talk them out of it. And I have had an immense amount of success doing that.
Okay. Peter, what's your reaction to that?
I love that. I think in general, investment success is just about minimizing mistakes. And so we do a lot of education of clients on the front end to try to at least make them aware so that when something happens that increases that uncertainty that was being talked about, that they can say, oh yeah, I do remember that. Or if I'm repeating it and say, remember when we had this conversation and we talked about X, Y, and Z happening? They're like, yeah, I do. So there's some familiarity with a repeated message. And clients that have been with us for a long time, we're not really talking about the election. We just aren't. They've already gone through this whole thing with us. They may even be a little frustrated in a kind of fun way. We're like, oh, I know what my advisor is going to say, and I know they're right, and they've always been right in these situations. I think what's harder actually for me sometimes is when I'm in a social setting, because when I'm in a client conversation, when I'm in sort of socially what has limitations and expectations of different sort of interactions, it's sort of closed the amount of things that can happen or be said. But when I'm standing on the tee box in a golf course or sitting around a dinner table, that's when the number of possible outcomes for a conversation can sort of get away from me. You lose a little of it. And what I often will do, and I found myself actually doing last week, I was in a golf tournament somebody had invited me to, and really someone was pushing politics. And you're in a tough setting and they're all looking to you as an expert. And I know this happens to advisors all the time. People want a stock pick or they want to know, where's the market going to go? And what I will typically tell people is, hey, I actually have some really good information. We should talk about this. Give me your number. I'm going to call you on Monday and I'm going to tell you the answer to your question. Now, if this is someone who's not a client, look at you. You are now developing business, which is one of the skills that I think all advisors are trying to hone. If it's an existing client, you pull them out of the social realm that they're in, which causes different reactions. And sometimes this, hey, it doesn't matter opinion makes you look stupid. It looks better to have a more eloquent, this is the end of the world sort of argument than, hey, none of this stuff really matters. Like the shrug your shoulders, aw shucks sort of response that we know is true, but in social settings leaves something to be desired and maybe even makes yourself as an advisor feel insecure.
Yeah, it's the whole thing's so fascinating to me because just telling people that, well, this is the way the world works not only is it not sufficient, it might aggravate them. You might lose an existing client or lose the opportunity to work with someone new. I think the dynamic that both of you alluded to in terms of an individual conversation versus a social setting. You're giving a talk, or you're at a mixer versus, behind closed doors in a one-on-one client meeting. The dynamic is probably quite different. Mike, is that your experience as well? Because I know you're out on the circuit, you're talking to large audiences, but I know, you're very well respected in your organization. You get pulled into those one-on-one meetings. Does that dynamic, do you need to pivot a little bit differently to have the conversation?
You do. If you're going to speak to 150 people at an event, at 150 different points of view, that could be 50-50, it could be 80-20, you have no idea what the split is. You have to talk about evergreen topics. And that's what I have found a lot of success in. You have to talk about the way the market interacts with politics, those kind of things. You have to make it broad so that your audience is not only being educated, but they're also interested, right? And that again goes back to storytelling. I found immense success from that. When you get pulled into one-on-one meetings, it becomes a lot more, what does this person's financial plan look like? What are their goals? What are all these things that make them who they are? And I have found, and this is going to sound, I don't want this to sound like it's naive or anything, but I have found that heavy doses of optimism can really move the needle on somebody who's a little captured by, I don't know, their experiences, the media, whatever. Like, again, I think Peter would agree with this. It's not our goal to change somebody's point of view. They have that view because that's how they grew up. That was their life. I'm not here to say the way you view life is different, is better or worse than the way I view life. You've hired us to help you with your financial plan, your goals. We're going to do that regardless of what happens in the world. But let's talk a little bit about why the world's such a great place, because you don't hear that very often. Our clients aren't getting doses of optimism. They're getting doses of the world is falling apart, right? So when you dose them with a little bit of optimism about what's actually going right, what's happening with your financial plan, look how far you've come. Look at your statement from 5 years ago. Look at it now. Like when you dose them with optimism, I can do that in a one-on-one setting that I can't do in like a 150 people setting.
Yeah. You and we're friends in real life. We're also friends on Twitter, and you are Mr. Optimism. And
it appears to be correct. It appears to be the correct view because I mean, the market does go up over time.
Yeah. No, progress is real. I think maybe I'm a grudging optimist. I don't know if I'm as cheerful as you are, Mike, but I come along. Sticking with you, Mike, for a second on the storytelling front. It's one of the core things that we preach and coach at Shaping Wealth, which is that we're not born as calculators. We're born as storytellers, and that the way that we are literally hardwired is toward sort of embracing story. And I learned this from my partner, our friend Neil Baird. There's a neuroscience of story literature that there's books and books written about this. Like the brain is literally hardwired to see us as heroes of our own journey. It's really fascinating. Are you finding and you've embraced this, which is great. Are you finding that the types of stories that you tell, is it, hey, the world's going to be a great place type story, or is it, oh, let me give you a plot twist? It was Kaiser Sose. You didn't see this coming. Like, I know you have a repertoire, but like there's going to be a lot of advisors downloading and watching this. Like, how would you school all of us in sort of the art of storytelling, especially with controversial topics like this?
I will say you have to be a storyteller. You just have to. If you're going to engage with real individuals, either in a speech setting or one-on-one, you have to become a storyteller. You do. Put down the finance textbooks, put down the CFA textbook. Please become a storyteller, because that is how people learn. Okay, that is just flat out, period. They will not remember charts and numbers. They will remember a good story. So you have to do that. How do you do that? You got to be a good reader, right? You have to consume a lot of stuff, whether it's history or biology. Any lesson that's true in those is also true in finance. There's lots of examples of that. Let me do you guys, we mentioned this chart, right? That you guys said the chart probably shows the growth of $100 over the last century, right? Let me tell you an unassailable way, to talk to clients about that chart in a politics event. You ready? All you do is you pick a company. Just pick a company out of the blue that you really like. I'm going to choose Starbucks, okay? So in 1973, Howard Schultz had this idea to sell the world's most bitter coffee. Like, he was super, super excited about selling super bitter coffee to people. And he found Starbucks in Seattle, Washington, okay, in 1973. Let me ask you a question, dear Mr. or Mrs. Client, or group of individuals. Do you think Howard Schultz, when he was founding the company, said, well, if there's a certain president, I'm not doing this. I'm waiting for a different president? Or you think as it went along, he was developing lattes and espressos? Do you think he said, oh God, if the outcome of this election isn't what I want, we're not doing iced lattes. We're just not doing them. We're not doing it. So you're trying to put into people's minds that Howard Schultz and Starbucks, pick any other company you want, that's what you're invested in. You're invested in people that work there, creating new products and solutions, and you get to benefit from that, Mr. or Mrs. Client. And he did that regardless of what the outcome of an election was. Just like us at Baird, we go to work every day and create problems, create process, and create solutions for our clients. That you got to talk to them about stories that they can relate to. I do it sometimes with NVIDIA. I do it with Costco. I just pick a company I really am excited about. It's unassailable because those people go to work every day, and that's what you're invested in.
And in this case, a story could just be a colorful example. So we can all, do we all have CFA charters? I think so. We know the relationship between corporate profitability and market outcomes. Well, if you try to talk to somebody about that, they're going to tune you out in about 3 sentences. If you ground it in a company they know, kind of almost like an a la old school Peter Lynch type framework, talk about Coca-Cola or McDonald's. I mean, depending on the crowd, maybe it is NVIDIA because they're into the trend. Peter, so, we've been friends for a long time. I've been tracking your career forever, and you are truly in my view, one of the top people in the country as it relates to financial literacy, teaching personal finance between your books, your blogs, the work I know you do behind the scenes at Plancorp. Maybe let's fold. I mean, this isn't politics per se, but it is the deep undercurrent of how we're engaging clients so that they're not freaking out at the wrong time. Where does kind of your and your team's commitment to financial education fit into this narrative? And maybe tell us a little bit specifically how, because there's so many different ways to go about it. There's 101 topics. You've been working on this for your entire career. Like, how do we fold really grounded, impactful financial literacy and financial education into the conversation so that our clients can navigate the anxiety and get to the other side?
Well, I think I can connect that with what Michael is saying, because my example is always McDonald's and Coca-Cola. I said, do you think like McDonald's is gonna, no, it's funny because I'm like, do you think like McDonald's is gonna stop selling cheeseburgers, or like Coca-Cola isn't gonna sell soda? Yes, the people in corporate finance will move dollars around their balance sheet and income statement differently. But ultimately, like the goal, as long as CEOs wake up every morning hoping to maximize shareholder value, your bet on the stock market is a good thing. Now, if we all wake up and decide we don't like money, you got a problem, because when you bet on the stock market, you're making a bet that people, you're essentially betting on capitalism. Now, what do we do to educate people there? I think the other point that Michael brings up is the way that you tell stories. And I like, Brian, that you said a story can just be an example. It doesn't have to be a 2-minute monologue, which I think is what makes people afraid of learning to storytell. But the way you get good stories is that you read more. And honestly, the biggest difference among the many wonderful advisors we have at Plancorp and wonderful advisors I see out in the community, the biggest difference between those who have good investment conversations and great investment conversations is that they're going to evaluate the client themselves and calibrate their message so that they're educating the client and bringing it to their level. Sometimes that does require data. Sometimes that requires the charts and the numbers. Sometimes that requires really deep understanding. So a common question we'll ask clients is, well, do you want to know how to tell time, or do you want to know how the watch works? And knowing the difference there can really change those examples you're going to give. For me, when I write something, whether it's for myself, whether it's for an internal communication or an external communication, I just have to assume that nobody understands anything who's going to read it. The key is, how can I give that new piece of advice or that new angle for the experienced reader or listener where they go, well, gosh, I've never thought of it that way. Because even the most basic books, there's a really good book from, I think it's Brian Feldman. It's called Why Do Stocks Go Up? And it's just this super simple explanation that really just ties back to stock returns track earnings. I mean, that's like the big thesis.
Feroldi. Is it Feroldi?
Feroldi. Sorry. Yes. Brian Feroldi. Thank you for the correction. Why do stocks go up? And it's just, here's someone who is like, we're all CFAs here, and you're reading through what is very elementary stuff, but nicely laid out. And it just kind of hits the point where sometimes even your most educated clients, you might be worried that an argument is too basic, but people like to review the basics. It sort of makes them feel more confident in the end state that you end up in. And so I've always been one for like, we can always go a layer deeper when you respond to a client's concern. You can start at the highest level, whereas I think sometimes advisors will jump 2-3 levels down when they shouldn't. So it's kind of that evaluating where is your client so you can calibrate where does the education need to come in. And, I think Michael, so I see Michael's work do this all the time, where I imagine that you have internally like the summary version, the advisor version, and the who wants to read the 25-page white paper version. Like, we can go into that level of detail, but nobody has that attention span on average. And so when you write the 25-page paper, the hardest part about that is cutting it down to the key ideas for the summary and the main point, and that's all that matters. And when I do show notes for podcasts, so when I have a guest on and I'm doing their show notes, I actually do them pretty manually, and it's amazing how much we repeat ourselves. The same point gets repeated over and over by people who I find to be concise and have great clarity of thought, but it's really distilling it down to that core first principle issue and just reminding clients of what that is. So when it comes to investing in politics, we say, well, hold on, let's take a step back. What is the reason that we're investing here in the first place? My response is typically, well, we invest to outpace inflation without taking undue risk. What are undue risks? Well, trying to use political outcomes or any sort of macroeconomic, any sort of forecast, let's go there, any sort of forecast about the future to drive your portfolio decisions is an undue risk. Some risks are bigger than others. Some risks you get compensated for. And so really just trying to say, is this something that you have a high degree of certainty? What if you're wrong? What if you're right? How does it change your life if you go to all cash or you sell all your bonds because you're worried about the debt? I hear some of that sometimes. I'm worried about the national debt. I'm going to sell all my bonds. You ask them, well, what about stocks? I don't care about stocks. Well, you think if the U.S. actually defaults, nothing's going to happen to stocks. And so it's kind of just educating people, calibrating, giving examples where you can, like you said, like Michael said, the calibration then allows you a different variety if you're well read, because then you can come up with analogies that are going to fit the person in front of you. Whereas investing for a long, long time was all sports analogies or gambling analogies. Whereas I think the more well-rounded or more well-read you are, the more analogies you can pull in.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really good. So Mike, you said, I know you're traveling all over the country and you don't know who's in the audience. 50-50, 80-20, 20-80. And it's not your job to know. It's our jobs to, provide that guidance and context. There's no doubt that the communications and mass media environment has changed so dramatically over our lifetimes that we have to almost recalibrate the way we think about consuming information. I mean, when I was a youngster in the 70s, it was 3 networks plus PBS plus another affiliate. There were maybe 5 stations, and it was that traditional kind of Walter Cronkite type mentality. Now it's you can't even count. Plus, as it relates, YouTube. Think about where YouTube has come from, out of the blue, as sort of what's going to probably be the biggest. I'm an old man. I'm going to call it a TV station. It's not a TV station, but kind of a broadcasting platform. So there's no taking people away from their phones or their televisions or any other, way to, that they're going to consume information. What's your advice, if any, I guess, to the end investor, but also in the middle to the advisor, as to how to structure or curate their media consumption? Do you advise people to turn off the TV? So I'm using the TV broadly. Do you say, hey, watch both Fox and MSNBC so you hear both awful sets of views on everything, or try to find something in the middle? Do you have a media consumption strategy that you like to talk to people about? Because it really is so informative of what we think, even what we think is incorrect.
This is a great question, and I will tell you how I'm currently ending my speeches to clients that basically addresses this topic. So, but before I start, let's just remember that 2 things. Number one, a person today consumes more information in a day than someone in the 1800s did all year. So the sheer volume of information is just staggering. And then remember that, when it boils down to people's media consumption, it will more than likely have a negative effect on their life. And I like to remind them that no news service is ever going to tell you that 2 million cars successfully parked in their driveway today, or that 2,000 planes successfully landed at O'Hare. You'll never hear that. Here's what I say, and I think this is true, and I think I will probably write about this at some point. I have been saying, and I think this has also been said online. I'm trying to remember who said it, but it inspired me. I think that a person's individuals, a client's, the 3 of us, human beings, I think that their most valuable resource is not money or time. And that might sound a little crazy, right? I don't think it's either of those. I think their most valuable resource is their attention. Their attention is a finite resource. You can only spend so much of it. And there exist trillion-dollar companies to capture that resource from you, right? To scroll, to whatever. There are billion-dollar media companies that exist to get you to continue to watch, because if you watch, you're nervous. If you're nervous, you'll keep watching. So this resource that you have, this finite resource, this attention you have, Neil would love this, but it basically creates your world, right? Like your attention creates your world. Like Peter's world and Brian's world and my world might be completely different based on where we're spending our resource. And I like to tell our clients, imagine you go away with your family for a week to Hawaii. What are you spending your resource on? You're spending it on the beach and family dinners and like walking with your wife or spouse, and you're having coffee in the morning. You're spending your entire resource on something that makes you incredibly happy. And when you come back, who isn't incredibly happy when they come back from vacation? All of us are, because we spent our resource on something that is enriching to our lives. Then I put it back into their laps. How are you spending your finite resource right now? Like, where's your attention going? Who's it going to? Why are they capturing it? And is it making your world a better place or a worse place? So I try to at least put a little bit of self-actualization in their laps to say, do me a favor. I think you could chip away at this kind of negative worldview by just spending your attention in a little bit of a different way. Like, I'm not telling you to watch no news, but if you watched a little less news, I think your worldview would increase dramatically. Your attention would be spent on better things. And none of us are ever going to stop people from watching news, or we're never going to stop anybody from being nervous about the things that they're being told to be nervous about. You have to put it in their lap that that resource that they're spending, they need to put some thought into it. And I've had a fair amount of success by doing that. And this is, again, all behavioral. None of this is numbers. This is all behavioral, all psychology. And I think that, the biggest pain points for advisors are the people that are constantly nervous and end up abandoning the plan because they're nervous. And you can't address that with a different plan. You have to address it at the real human level. And I've had a lot of success by doing this.
What about you, Peter? What's your counsel media consumption / attention protection strategy, both for your firm's clients and for the broader audience that you're addressing through your podcasts and books and things like that?
Yeah, I would say that we try to, one of the big reasons I started a podcast was to try to get in clients' ears on a weekly basis, because I have not had success changing people's consumption behaviors. I say you shouldn't watch the news. My parents, for example, if there's anybody I might have even the slightest a bit of ability to police, it'd be what my parents watch on the news. And my dad tapes the news, which, I mean, come on, like, Dad.
VHS?
Or DVR or whatever, but it's still like, I'm like, I'm like, why do you do this? He's like, well, I just want to see what's been going on and keep up. I'm like, well, who cares? What is so important? And I think the harder part with retirees is they do fill their day differently than when they're working. So there is two different stages of life. If you're a parent of children who can't drive themselves yet, or or still in the house, or require your full attention, chances are you're not using your limited amount of attention that is just for you on media consumption. Maybe social media, maybe silly videos, but very rarely are you going to see people watching nightly news or weekend morning news. One thing that strikes me listening to Mike talk, though, is I wonder if you were talking to a large group of investors the way you do, Mike, or even if you're in a client meeting, if you were to give everyone an assignment and say, hey, tonight, I want you to look up 5 reasons that could be good for you if the presidential candidate you don't want to win wins. Why don't you go online and Google 5 things that would be a good thing for you should this candidate win? Or, hey, why don't you go home and find 5 things that would give you optimism about the future regardless of the candidate, and email those to me. I've never actually done that before, but it does occur to me a lot of times when I'm speaking in front of big audiences, which is not as often as the two of you. I often try to do something where the audience can email back and I can create some sort of dialogue one-on-one with the client. I truly have never tried this before, but it does strike me to say, look, I will, why don't we do this exercise? Do me a favor. Now, will I nudge the client afterwards and say, hey, maybe 5 is too many. Give me 3 reasons. Give me 2 reasons. Anything where it's sort of what we do at the investment committee level. We definitely try to make it for the things that we say no to. I want to be able to argue for those things just as well as the people who are, 1, trying to sell them to me, or 2, think I've made the wrong choice by not including them in my portfolio. I mean, that's a pretty normal standard that we have at Plancorp. Why couldn't we sort of nudge clients to that same standard to say, well, why don't you help them and facilitate and be not just their teacher in education, a real teacher, a real mentor is going to give them some homework. Again, I don't know how everyone would respond. I can think of a couple where the husband is 84, but super sharp, very, very sharp, and usually willing to do homework, as well as his 78-year-old wife, who's typically the financial decision maker. I could give them the homework, but depending on how agitated they are about the conversation, about the politics being discussed, they may or may not do the homework. There are others where they're really busy, and I would think, oh my God, I'd hate to give this partner at a giant law firm this little bit of homework assignment, but he would totally get back to me before I went to bed. And so I think, I've never actually tried this, so I have no basis for this working, but it did occur to me, Mike, as you were talking, I wonder if this would get people's mindset in a better position, because I just don't feel like we can tell them to turn off the TV or don't read the newspaper. I have never personally had success in getting them to implement that behavior.
You know what? One question I would love to ask that I don't think would ever get a good answer, but it's a great question. And it's, what would you change your mind on if you grew up in a different way? Like that's a question that's very challenging to somebody's core. And I'm sure most people would just shrug it off and be like, I don't know, I might think differently about like the weather. I don't know. But it's a real fundamental question to get to the point that all of us have different experiences. They are what make us who we are. Try to understand that the way you view the world will never, ever, ever line up with how everybody else views the world, because we all just grew up in different ways. We all grew up with different parents and different locations and different communities, and it will never all match. But I would love to ask that question just to put somebody into their thought for even a moment.
How might you think differently if you were born under different circumstances? Don't be surprised if there's a Shaping Wealth webinar on that sometime soon. Peter, I'm sorry, I think I cut across you.
Oh, I was just going to say, for all of us who travel a lot, I feel like that alone, relative to people I know who don't really leave their bubble that often, when you leave your bubble, whether it's the ride from the airport to the hotel, if that's the only, and in a different city, if that's the only time you leave the bubble, you still leave it. And you're like, wow, I wonder how these people are living. I do think when you travel frequently, you do, at least, whether you actually understand others' perspectives or not, I have no idea, but you at least can see how there would be other perspectives. And I could see how people would be agitated by any sort of outcome when you go to enough places and you see enough different things. But for a lot of people who are just always in their neighborhood, going to their same places, it's easy to lose sight of how big the world really is.
Yeah, and also when you see the world through social media.
Yep. Which is catered to your lens, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly. It's an artifice by definition. I mean, both you guys are investment strategists, influencing the allocation of many billions of dollars of other people's money. I wanted to ask a few questions, kind of in the investment strategy front. So, I mean, we've established that there's the big chart out there that shows that there's not a material impact of the election outcome and general market outcome, but I imagine that you guys have both heard. I have certainly heard back in my investing days, this was a topic that, different political leanings are going to have different impacts on different sectors: technology, industrials, automation, or automotive, healthcare, defense spending, things like that. How does, Peter, start with you? As your clients might, dig in on, hey, I'd love to lean the portfolio more into healthcare or the defense industries or tech because I think X causes Y. I'm guessing you don't say, oh, you know what, you shouldn't have any thoughts about active investing at all and just own the entire market. Maybe that's the ultimate outcome, not sure. But I guess, how do you think about that level of thinking? It's less dramatic than the broader, oh my gosh, if he or she wins, the world's going to go to hell. It's more of we can make a little bit extra money if we fade the portfolio this way or the other. How do you approach that?
So I started my career as a stock analyst, and I usually let clients know that. And such tactical moves were not just common, but expected. If you're a stock analyst and you are not somehow incorporating political outcomes into your thesis on a company, you are not really doing your job. And there's some truth to it because regulations and government spending can influence earnings, point blank. Now, what we at Plancorp won't proactively make any sort of tactical portfolio move, but typically when people are asking me to make any sort of tactical portfolio move because of the election or any other cause, whether they want to go into cryptocurrency, an individual stock, a sector, if they want to express their belief about some potential future, I don't really have a problem with people having a dedicated part of their portfolio for that. Now, what I'll typically ask clients is like, well, hey, give me the investment thesis. Like, what is the thesis? Okay. And just so you know, I'm going to write this down for my records because I want you to remember, when we're talking about this later, why we did it. And then I'll also ask them to tell me why it might go wrong. And now I've documented a couple things for them. Like, why is this a good investment? Why might it not work out? And my hopeful lesson is that come 5 years later, hopefully they got rich off the stock and great job. Like, maybe they got rich for the wrong reason. It also gives them an opportunity if they want to walk away from a losing investment to either one, learn a lesson that stock picking or sector picking is hard. The second piece though, is more just of a, hey, were you right, but the outcome was different than you expected? Or, hey, this is exactly what went wrong. It's just like a little bit of an archive. And the way that at least I know at Plancorp, and I know from talking to other advisors that people keep notes on their clients, it's not a big lift. It really isn't that hard to document and archive it. And I think encouraging clients that it's okay to express themselves with some controlled amount of money that won't hurt them is totally fine. At the grand scheme of things, it goes back to the only way where it would like change your retirement date or change your lifestyle in a meaningful way would be to make such an outsized bet that they would agree that that equates with undue risk and is irresponsible. And so I think that's sort of where the conversation, that's the center of gravity to it. I would say, and God, I mean, it's pretty pointless without the actual evidence at hand. But I do feel like the last two elections had a couple sectors that everybody felt like were going to do really well and ultimately didn't.
I have a data point.
Oh, I got that too. Yeah, I got that too.
Okay, good. Because I've seen the data point. I just don't know where it went. So, well, why don't I pass the baton? Let's pass the baton here.
Well, the data point I have, and I think Mike and I read the exact same thing, so he reads more than I do at this point, but it's that under Trump, clean energy did better than traditional energy, and under Biden, traditional energy did better than clean energy.
I've seen that one for sure.
Like crushed it. Like alternative energy crushed it under Donald Trump's presidency. Alternative just crushed traditional energy.
All right. So Peter got the sector question. Mike, you get the geopolitics question. China, Russia, Ukraine, Mexico. There's a lot going on. The world is a big and noisy place, and there are things to worry about. So same structure of question for Peter on the sector front for you in terms of trade war with China, complicated relationships with Russia, the U.S.-European alliance going through its ups and downs as it has over many decades. How do you think about counseling not just the many clients of Baird, but the 1,000+ advisors at Baird who are thinking about, what's happening in the world? It's kind of hard not to think about these things, worry about these things. This is what we do.
Is this going to be like real? Like, are you guys going to be like, oh my God, he's talking about storytelling again? I don't want to pay attention right now because.
No, you got your method. I love it.
So people come to me, they say, Mike, Ukraine, Russia, they say China, Taiwan, they go through a host of things that are currently relevant. There's two tacks I take. Number one is I say, in the last 24 years, okay, you just lived through the last 2 decades, 24 years, what were the 3 biggest things that impacted the stock market? What were the 3 biggest things that impacted our lives and what were they? And I go, well, it was COVID, it was the global financial crisis, and it was 9/11. And I say, those 3 things, those were all surprises, right? Like nobody knew any of those were going to happen. Like the 3 biggest things that were actually a big threat to your money were all surprises. And then I shift gears and I say, I am a student of history. I've looked at every single geopolitical event all the way back to World War II. Do you remember the Cuban Missile Crisis? You guys and usually it's an older client. Do you remember the Cuban Missile Crisis? Yeah. that was probably the closest the United States and the world, frankly, has been to annihilation since the end of World War II, right? That was like the absolute scariest moment in history. And I looked back, and it turns out the stock market fell 6% during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And then by the end of the year, it was at a new all-time high. So, dear Mr. or Mrs. Klein, or advisor, or blog reader, or YouTube listener, world events, global events, geopolitical events tend to spike volatility, but ultimately ask yourself, does it affect the earnings of Coca-Cola and Walmart and Costco and Procter and Gamble and Starbucks? Does Russia invading Ukraine have a material effect on the profits of Meta, right? So you have to kind of bring it back to money, right? I'm not here to weigh in on the socio-economic, geopolitical ramifications. We are here to interact with you about your money, storytelling. But again, we're always constantly reminding people, if we talk about a trade war every day, does the market know about it? Objectively, it does. If we talk about China invading Taiwan every single day, does the market know about it? Yes. Would it have an impact on the stock market? Yes, but we talk about it every single day. It's only the stuff we don't talk about that is like truly, truly a risk, where all the bad behavior and all the bad mistakes tend to happen.
Yeah, it's a powerful point. I mean, back in, I still think my investing career is longer than my behavioral career. I mean, as I get older, I think it's about a 50-50 split now, but I've spent more on the portfolio side. And, what was one of the just foundational tenets, which is that the market is massive and always paying attention. And the chance that something that Citadel and Millennium and Goldman Prop doesn't know, can we just say it's zero? Can we just say it's absolutely zero? So, markets might not be perfectly efficient, but they're efficient-ish. And, this information is pieced in.
Yeah, I just think a good interaction between an advisor and a client, or a strategist and a client and an advisor in a room, whatever, is to say, if we're talking about it here in Milwaukee, or if we're talking about it here in Chicago or Athens, Georgia, or whatever, does the market know about it, right? If we're talking about it in a tiny room, does the market know about it? And it's a good way to put into their laps that I'm sure it does.
Right. So people have that's already priced into the kind of incremental, or into the marginal trade. So from a strategy point of view, and Peter, you actually began to go in this direction, but I want to tease it out explicitly and ask both of your opinion on advisors and clients agreeing on a trading account, what I've sometimes referred to as a cowboy account, where, boy, they're just not going to let it go. They're dog with a bone. I'm really worried about this. Or I think the opportunity is here. And so the percentage is 2% or 5% or 3% of your portfolio. Let's use that release valve to express views so that we could scratch that itch, while at the same time kind of maintaining fidelity to the overall portfolio, which hopefully is built on core, principles of diversification, long-term focus, integrity to the plan, things like that. Do you guys have views on the value, or maybe maybe it's a waste of time, of that so-called cowboy or release valve portfolio?
Well, the value of it, I think, is complicated in the sense that I don't know that you're adding optimal portfolio value per se, but I think it's important to not make anybody feel like their view is wrong. And I think if people take a natural interest in this part of the world, to say that they can't do it is sort of like taking away a hobby. And that's not what you're looking to do. You do want to prevent harm to some extent. And whatever the percentage is, you as an advisor should have enough information to just know, if they suffered a permanent loss here, like, what would that look like? Because ultimately it goes back to in order to materially change your life, you would have to make a very outsized bet in any sort of direction. And I think all clients that I've ever spoken to, when said that way, know that that's not an appropriate thing. That's not even what they're looking to do. I think, to use your words, Brian, they're just looking to earn a little more, just trying to take advantage, trying to go around the edges. And like you said, if we're talking about it, everybody knows. And the only way really to out earn the market is to either have better information than everybody else or be better at interpreting information than everybody else. And so what Mr. and Mrs. Client information do you have that is better than literally everybody else whose job it is to do this? Or you, Mr. and Mrs. Client, what makes you think that you're going to be better at interpreting the given information that everybody else in the world has? It sort of sets it up to be like, look, this is not a good idea. We can put all the, but we'll let you do it. And we're going to make sure you don't harm yourself. And we will be rooting for you. And when you're right, we will smile and clap and be happy that you made some money. And if you lose, we won't say a word about it. You'll see it on paper. We don't have to say a darn thing. I do have one client who always jokes with me. He's like, so when are you guys going to hire me as an equity analyst? Because he's bought in a couple stocks over the years. Now, he never remembers the times when he said, oh, well, let's buy this at this price, Bitcoin at this price point, or, any given individual stock at a certain price point. Those all get forgotten. But, ultimately, that's how we know that our clients are human. The key is not to try to take the human out of human behavior and just sort of like build bridges around them or over them and accommodate them.
Yeah. Yeah. And you alluded to, I think more important than the idea of earning a little bit more is actually the sense that you are right. People want to feel like they know a little bit more than others. Mike, what's your view on the cowboy account or the release valve account?
Let's link this to behavioral finance because that's what we're all kind of big fans of. So,
well, to me, this is a behavioral hedge. So that I always describe this as this type of 3% allocation. Do whatever you want. I call it a behavioral hedge.
So let's make this the title of this section. All investing is just an exercise in regret minimization. That's true. I think that's objectively true. Will you regret owning it and it going down, or will you regret not owning it and it going up? Right? We're just trying to do this exercise in regret minimization. So I do think, and I'm not an advisor. I think I'd be curious to talk to some of our biggest advisors on this topic. I do think it's a good idea. I do think that human beings being told, if you invest in this 60-40, this broad asset allocation, and you hold it for 40 years, you'll eventually reach your goals, and this will be a positive outcome for everybody. That's fine and all, but most people don't occupy a world of 40-year timeframes, and I think that's where this notion of, hey, maybe if I put $5,000 into this or $8,000 into that, I have something to watch every day. And you know what? I get to talk about it with my buddy at the club, and there's nothing I like more than being at the club and talk to my buddy about this thing that I own. And I think that, again, is all behavioral. That's all it's all just how people act. They don't exist on spreadsheets. They exist in real life. And I actually do think it's something that advisors might want to consider to just scratch that itch, keep them from dipping into the big asset allocation, which is there, the cash flow plan, all of that, which exists to make everybody reach their goals and successes. But maybe this tiny little thing lets them talk to their buddy at the club, and gosh darn it, they love doing that.
So we're about at the top of the hour or so. This has flown by and been as energizing as I hoped it would be. I want to give each of you guys kind of the last say in terms of, timing wise. This episode of Chopping Wealth, we're kind of 6 weeks out from the 2024 presidential election, but this is going to be evergreen content that we can all look back on, and advisors will and their clients maybe will be watching this months and years from now. So in terms of final word on the big topic, of politics, elections, markets, and advice, I want to give you both the floor to sort of wrap up with a message. Mike, I'll make it clear, a story that you would like to share. Peter, I'll give it to you first.
Sure. Well, I think proactive communication, wildly important. And I think having empathy for the clients, not trying to, you're never going to change their viewpoint on politics. You have no business trying to project your own viewpoint. Even if you agree, you're just going to agitate and enrage and create more fear. So I think it's just trying to pull the emotion out of it and back it up. And we've alluded to this in a couple different ways, and reminding people what drives returns and why do we invest in the first place. And really just trying to put it into perspective from that point of view. I love the storytelling, the examples. We keep talking about the consumer brands that are relatable to say, like, how is this going to change that? I honestly, I love, Michael, the way you said, what are the three biggest things that have happened, in the past few decades? And they would come up with those events on their own. And if they didn't, you could say, well, what about COVID or what about 9/11? That to me is a really powerful way to go about it. I was writing it down as you were saying. I love that question alone.
I could talk for another hour easily. You guys know I'm a talker, and this is so up my alley. Here's what I'm going to give you guys exactly what to do, because in my time experience with advisors, they want to be told exactly what to do. So I'm going to tell you exactly what to do. Are you ready? You're going to get a chart. It's going to show the growth of a dollar for the last 60 years. It's a nice big long chart. Large cap stocks. It goes up like this, and you're going to filter it by president. Red, blue, red, blue. There's 15 of them in there. I think it's like 8 Ds and 7 Rs. You're going to put that in front of a client. You say, look at the growth of this over the last 60 years. Red, blue, red, blue. Look, Mr. Client, Miss Family. You're going to say, what makes this go up? And ask them, what makes this go up? Put it in their laps. And they might say all sorts of things, but the message you're going to go back to, and this is where the optimism and the evergreen takes come in. You say, what makes this go up is your neighbors going to work, and me going to work, and all the people that make up the companies of the United States going to work and creating new products and solving problems. And do you think, Mr. or Mrs. Client, the day after the election, we have this election in 50 days, do you think that they will go to work the next day? Do you think your neighbors will still go to work? Yes or no? Definitively, yes. I'm going to go to work the next day. My team's going to go to work the next day. And so will the people that work at Apple, and so will the people that work at Walmart. And that's what you're invested in. And leave it at that. You have to put it in their laps that what makes number go up, okay, is their neighbors going to companies and doing things, not Washington, D.C., not an election, not the makeup of Congress. There are policies that can affect that number. But hey, over the last 100 years, are there a lot of policies in here? Are there a lot of things that happened on this chart? And look what it did. Lots of policies. So I think, and that was my recipe for you, that's the best way to remind people what makes number go up. Your neighbors who are great people, and their family go to church and they love their neighbor. Like, just try to dose them with that. And it's kind of unassailable. It's really hard to argue that your neighbors aren't going to go to work the next day.
I could not have asked for a better wrap up to the conversation. I appreciate both of you so much. Peter Lazaroff from Plancorp, Mike Antonelli from Baird. Thank you so much. This was our monthly episode of Chopping Wealth, one of the great features of our Compass platform. On behalf of the whole Shaping Wealth team, we'll see you very soon. Thank you.